The listening project is just before the midnight news, but first we'll head to Westminster for Today in Parliament.
Order, order. Hello, this is Mark Darcy in a Westminster on the brink. In their first Saturday sitting since the Falklands War, MPs will be asked to vote on Boris Johnson's new-look Brexit agreement with the EU. Leader of the Commons, Jacob Rees-Mogg, thought it was good enough to eat.
I must say this deal is the Tornado's Rossini of a deal. It is a deal that one can eat with joy and pleasure.
The SNP's Pete Wishart predicted Mr Rees-Mogg would be eating his words.
Churchill may have indeed found his own words very nutritious, but I suspect that the Leader of the House will only get indigestion.
So who'll be reaching for the Epsom salts and who'll be licking their chops come the close of Commons business tomorrow? As the experience of the last couple of attempts shows, assembling a majority behind any version of Brexit in this House of Commons is near impossible. Ministers set out a lure for one group of MPs and it scares away another. A concession to Remain alienates Brexiteers and vice versa. And even this afternoon, sceptical MPs were being called to Downing Street to be wooed. This was the Tory veteran Sir Bill Cash leaving the building.
I am very glad that we've had such constructive discussions. Nothing is concluded yet.
And this was former Minister Mark Francois going in.
Mr Francois, will you be backing the deal? I haven't decided yet.
Some MPs, notably the Northern Ireland Democratic Unionists and some of their close allies amongst Conservative Brexiteers, are concerned about Northern Ireland's status under the new plan. Does it pave the way for a united Ireland? Conservative John Barron, a former army officer, thought not.
I've served in the province during the Troubles. The union is terribly important to me. If I genuinely thought that this was going to cause a problem, I would not be supporting it.
Another group of potential supporters is Labour MPs, especially from pro-Brexit constituencies who want a Brexit deal, like the veteran Ronnie Campbell.
At the moment, I'll be voting to support the deal, but I am getting a lot of pressure from the head lads of the Labour Party, like Corbyn and John MacDonald, to abstain because of the deregulation of workers' rights.
That's the key issue here, whether any deal would enshrine labour standards and protection for consumers and the environment. The issue came up on Wednesday when the Brexit Select Committee heard from the Brexit Secretary, Steve Barclay. The Labour MP, Pat McFadden, thought the new deal might undermine protections that Theresa May had conceded in her now-defunct deal.
Can you explain to us why the government now wants to depart from those previous commitments in the withdrawal agreement to level playing field clauses on labour, social standards, environmental protections and so on?
Steve Barclay said the government didn't intend to turn Britain into a low social standards zone, undercutting the EU from 22 miles offshore.
It's actually the former Chancellor in a speech to De Bild who talked about Singapore on the Thames. But I don't think there is any desire to have a deregulatory approach.
But when I spoke to Mr McFadden after that hearing, he was unpersuaded.
The problem with that is Boris Johnson's built his journalistic career on writing weekly columns attacking these things as being needless Brussels red tape. So it's quite hard to believe that suddenly that he's had some Damascene conversion.
One refuge for MPs who want to vote for a deal, but who fear some last-minute piece of parliamentary judo that trips the country into a no-deal exit by accident or design, is an amendment put down by the Conservative ex-minister Sir Oliver Letwin. It would withhold agreement to the deal until it had been put into law in a new withdrawal agreement bill. And in the meantime, it would trigger the so-called Ben Act, which would require the Prime Minister to seek a further postponement of Brexit till January the 31st.
If we don't need the extension, it should terminate immediately we leave the EU. And we're all in favour of doing this as rapidly as possible. If it can be done by the 31st of October, terrific. We'll want to make sure that we don't drop out by mistake on the 31st of October if something goes wrong between Saturday and then.
What they fear is that having passed the motion required by the Ben Act so that the PM doesn't have to seek a postponement of Brexit, somehow the Boris Johnson deal then fails, perhaps engineered by MPs who do want a no-deal exit, and then there's no time left to respond. So the Letwin plan's a kind of safety net for a deal. Ex-Minister Stephen Hammond says it's a result of a breakdown of trust amongst MPs, which has left them deeply suspicious of each other's cunning plans.
It is born out of concern that something might happen which would still frustrate the implementation bill. There's a lot of mistrust in politics at the moment over the Brexit issue, and so a lot of people will want the insurance policy. So I think you're right, it may well have a sporting chance. If this passes, it may well be that others who say they're going to support may then feel they aren't able to support, and so we lose the whole option of voting for the deal. So the government, I think, needs to think very carefully about how does it give Oliver and a lot of colleagues the reassurance they seek. And one way to do that would be to say, we're having the implementation bill next week. If that fails to pass, by next Friday we'll sit on Saturday to decide another future.
Every reading of the Commons numbers looks very tight, but one arch-Brexiteer, Douglas Carswell, who was a Conservative and then a UKIP MP, urges Brexiteers to seize the moment.
This is the real deal. As the only person who's ever elected to represent UKIP in a general election, I wouldn't hesitate to support this if I was still in the House of Commons. I wouldn't support it grudgingly, I wouldn't support it reluctantly, I would support it with real enthusiasm. This deal is everything that people like me have been campaigning for. It asserts the supremacy of UK law, it gives us the ability to control our borders, it allows us to leave the common agricultural policy and the common fisheries policy, it gets rid of all that nonsense about regulatory alignment and a common rule book that Theresa May was trying to foist on us.
Douglas Carswell. Of course, Brexit isn't the only constitutional crisis in town. At her party conference, the SNP leader and Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon announced she would be seeking powers from Westminster to hold a second referendum on independence.
By the new year, we will have completed our legislative preparations. We are already working to update the independence prospectus. And I can confirm today that before the end of this year, I will demand the transfer of power that puts the legality of that referendum beyond any doubt.
Note the emphasis on getting a legally watertight referendum, which would require Westminster to grant the Scottish Government the temporary power to hold another referendum, something ministers might well refuse. Suppose they did. What then? Well, one of the debates at the SNP conference was on a Plan B for independence, possibly simply declaring independence without any referendum if the SNP won the next Scottish elections. The party leadership is not in favour, and the idea was decisively voted down. This was the SNP's Westminster leader, Ian Blackford, addressing the conference.
The way to deliver independence is in a legal referendum that will be accepted and recognised by our European and international partners. So when you hear talk of a so-called Plan B, when you hear talk of a so-called Plan B, I ask you to consider this. The time to talk of a Plan B is not when Plan A has momentum.